There has been a sentence sitting quietly at the center of this case since the very beginning. Not from tabloids, not from some click-driven podcast, but from a retired FBI agent, stated on record to a national news outlet. Just 7 words, yet if you truly take them seriously, they have the power to reshape everything you think you know. The plan was not to hurt her. This is what this video is really about. Not who took Nancy Guthrie, not where she is, not the ransom notes, the DNA, or the thousands of hours of surveillance footage you've already followed. All of that still matters. But this time, we're narrowing in on something more precise, something far more unsettling. What happened that turned a plan, not meant to harm, into a mystery that still hasn't been resolved? This isn't just about what happened that morning. It's about what was supposed to happen, and the one irreversible moment that ensured it never did. So let's strip everything back to zero. Forget the blood on the porch. Forget the mask, the backpack, the frozen frame of surveillance footage. Instead, focus on the question almost no one has dared to examine closely enough. What was this person actually trying to do? Not the outcome, the intention, the design. The plan already in motion when he stepped toward that house in the darkness of a February morning. Fully covered, head to toe, every piece of clothing chosen with precision to leave no trace. A backpack on his shoulders. A mask concealing everything but his eyes. Because here's the unsettling truth about premeditated violence. It doesn't look like this. Real planned violence is efficient, direct. It doesn't require hiding identity to this extent, because identity only matters if someone survives to report it. It doesn't require a backpack, unless something, or someone, is meant to be moved. It doesn't unfold with this kind of calculated, step-by-step caution, where contingencies are considered, though not perfectly executed. Planned violence is quick. It strikes, and it's gone. But what happened on that porch in the early hours of February first didn't move like that. It didn't rush, it developed. It had layers, structure, a deliberate pacing. It looked less like chaos and more like construction, the architecture of something designed to take time. And that kind of structure has a name. A controlled abduction. A method built on control, not destruction. Because in a controlled abduction, the victim's survival isn't incidental, it's essential. In a controlled abduction, everything revolves around one core principle. The target must remain alive, intact, and valuable. Alive, to matter. Unharmed, to prove they're still worth something. Stable, so whatever exchange was planned can actually happen. You don't construct a plan around a living person only to harm them right at the point of contact. That's not execution, that's collapse. So when we talk about the violence in this case, about the blood Nancy Guthrie left behind, we're not looking at intention. We're looking at failure. A plan, carefully built for a completely different outcome, unraveling in real time on a quiet porch in the Catalina foothills while Tucson slept. Because the most compelling explanation is also the simplest, and the most human. She recognized him. In that instant, one moment of recognition, every scenario the abductor had prepared fell apart. Even a retired FBI agent, Andrew Bringwell, after reviewing the evidence, the footage, the timeline, the weapon, the backpack, reached a conclusion that should have changed the conversation. The intent was kidnapping, until something went wrong. This isn't speculation driven by emotion. It's a professional reading of a plan that didn't fail quietly. It broke, violently, in plain sight. This isn't a random opinion or a sensational hot take. Andrew Bringwell spent years inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation working violent crime and abduction cases. His perspective carries weight, and his professional conclusion is clear. The intent was kidnapping. Not murder. Not assault. A controlled abduction, designed with a purpose beyond the act itself. Until something went wrong. He pointed out something even more striking. If the goal had been to kill Nancy Guthrie, it could have been done instantly. The suspect had a loaded gun, ready, accessible. The target, 84 years old, alone, caught off guard, was completely vulnerable. It would have taken a single action. But that action never happened. And that absence is one of the most revealing details in the entire case. Because what unfolded wasn't the clean, decisive violence of intent. It was chaotic, reactive. Not execution, but disruption. A plan breaking apart under pressure, producing consequences it was never meant to include. Bringwell even drew a chilling parallel to the 1991 kidnapping of Carrie Lawson, another case that began as a calculated ransom abduction. Carrie Lawson wasn't meant to be killed either. But when the plan collapsed, everything changed. Jerry Bland lost control, the outcome turned fatal, and the truth was buried with him. And that parallel raises an unsettling possibility. When a controlled plan fails, it doesn't just stop, it mutates. That case didn't just close on paper, it stayed with Andrew Bringwell for decades. It broke on the very day his eldest daughter was born, and by his own admission, it still haunts him. That detail isn't sentimental. It explains why, when examining the case of Nancy Guthrie, he immediately recognized a deeper structural similarity. Both cases, from the 1991 kidnapping of Carrie Lawson to Guthrie, began with the same underlying design: abduct the victim, keep them alive as leverage, and execute an exchange. But once the plan collapses, the outcome is no longer driven by intent. It's shaped by the split-second decisions of someone in panic. So what caused the plan to fail here? The answer may already be in the surveillance footage. Not just as evidence, but as a behavioral document, a window into the suspect's mindset. And when viewed through that lens, one detail stands out: he wasn't afraid. Brianna Fox described it precisely. He almost saunters up, as if he belongs there. That's not a casual observation. Sauntering signals a complete absence of urgency, no visible fear, no hesitation. It's the movement of someone who believes everything is under control, right up until the moment it isn't. A different angle, but the same conclusion, comes from Mark Hurrian. When reviewing the footage, he didn't focus on what the suspect did, but on what he failed to prepare. A truly methodical individual, he noted, would have brought tools from the start: a hammer to disable the camera, or spray paint to obscure the lens. This suspect didn't. He improvised, grabbing a piece of vegetation from the yard instead. At first glance, that looks like poor planning. But look closer, and it reveals a very specific kind of confidence. This wasn't someone rehearsing failure scenarios. This was someone who only imagined success. A person who anticipates complications brings tools. A person who believes the plan is already won in his mind treats the camera as a minor obstacle, something easily handled in the moment. The firearm adds another layer. Hurrian pointed out the unusual way it was carried, openly positioned at the front in what appeared to be a cheap, off-brand holster. Not tactical. Not the setup of someone trained or experienced with weapons in real operations. His interpretation: the gun may have functioned more as a prop than a primary tool, something meant to compel compliance, not to be used. And that aligns with the broader behavioral picture. The weapon wasn't there to end a life, it was there to control one. When the footage is examined closely, another detail emerges. One that sharply contrasts with the suspect's improvisation at the camera. According to Weaver Barkman, the suspect showed clear forensic awareness. He was fully covered: mask, gloves, jacket, long pants, closed shoes. Not a single exposed surface. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This was preparation. Careful, deliberate, and informed. And that's where the contradiction becomes revealing. On one hand, he meticulously planned for the evidence he might leave behind. On the other, he failed to prepare for real-time obstacles. That gap tells us exactly what kind of confidence he had. He anticipated the aftermath, but not the operation itself going wrong. Because in his mind, it wouldn't. The target would comply. The situation would stay controlled. The plan would unfold exactly as intended. A camera only becomes a problem when something deviates. And in his version of events, nothing was supposed to. Taken together, Mark Hurrian's behavioral insight, Barkman's forensic analysis, and Brianna Fox's observation of movement, they all point to the same profile: a man who arrived calm, deliberate, and confident. Someone who planned enough to understand the evidence, but not enough to imagine failure. This is a man who believed he understood his target well enough to predict her reaction. Not just that she would comply, but how she would comply. And the clearest window into that belief isn't just the presence of the gun, but the way it was carried. As Mark Hurrian noted, it wasn't positioned for tactical use. It was worn openly, awkwardly, almost deliberately visible, less a weapon of action, more a tool of perception. Because in this kind of plan, the gun isn't meant to be fired. It's meant to be seen. It's there to send a message instantly. Resistance is irrational. Cooperation is the only path forward. In a compliance-based abduction, that visible threat becomes the final piece of control, the element designed to make force unnecessary. Everything else supports that structure. The mask hides identity. The timing avoids witnesses. The forensic preparation erases traces. And the gun removes choice. She sees it, she complies, the plan moves forward, clean and controlled. But that's not what happened. And in the gap between what the gun was meant to do and what actually unfolded on that porch, you can see the entire plan fracture. Because the mask wasn't just concealment, it was essential. In a ransom-driven abduction, anonymity is everything. It's what allows the victim to survive, what makes negotiation possible, what keeps the outcome clean. The moment that anonymity is broken, the entire logic of the plan collapses with it. If Nancy Guthrie had been successfully taken and held, her eventual release would depend on one critical condition. She could not identify the person who took her. That's what the mask was really for. Not just to hide a face, but to protect the ending. To guarantee a clean exit, a future where the abductor walks away without consequence. Because the moment that anonymity fails, everything collapses. If she knows who he is, release is no longer an option. A single phone call would unravel his entire life. Negotiation becomes meaningless. Every path the plan depended on, her going home, the exchange happening, the story ending quietly, disappears instantly. The mask wasn't about the moment. It was about what comes after. It was the safeguard for the future he had already imagined. And if that safeguard breaks, then so does every outcome he planned for. Which means in that instant, on that dark residential porch, the situation transforms. She is no longer a controllable target. She becomes a witness who cannot be set free. And that shift, as analysts like Johnny Gruing would recognize, is where controlled plans stop being controlled and start becoming unpredictable. Johnny Gruing has spoken openly about what likely unfolded inside that house, and his conclusion is blunt. This was never the intended outcome. The suspect didn't execute a plan. He lost control of one. The violence wasn't designed. It was the byproduct of a plan collapsing in a way he never anticipated. And that distinction matters. Because the recognition theory isn't about intent, it's about failure. It identifies the one variable that turned a controlled abduction into chaos. Not something external. Not chance. But something already embedded in the situation from the very beginning. Something the mask was supposed to eliminate, and ultimately didn't. Look at the setting. The Catalina foothills isn't just any neighborhood. It's quiet, stable, familiar. People know each other. They recognize routines, faces, movements. Anything out of place stands out immediately. And Nancy Guthrie wasn't a stranger there. She was part of that fabric. Years in the same home, the same community, the same circle. In a place like that, recognition isn't difficult. It's instinct, which raises the possibility that the one thing the entire plan depended on preventing was the one thing it couldn't stop. What people often overlook is that recognition doesn't begin with a face. It begins with familiarity. Nancy Guthrie didn't just know names in her community. She knew people, the subtle, physical signatures that defined them. The way someone carries their shoulders. The rhythm of their walk. The tone of a voice heard countless times before. These are details absorbed unconsciously over years, until recognition happens instantly, without thought. And that's the flaw in the mask. It hides a face, but nothing else. Not the height, not the posture, not the movement, not the small, involuntary habits that make a person uniquely identifiable. The way someone shifts their weight, holds their hands, tilts their head, these are as distinct as fingerprints, and far harder to conceal. So if the person who stepped onto that porch was someone she had known, even casually, even distantly, then the mask was never going to be enough. Because in that moment, recognition wouldn't need clarity. It would only need familiarity. Not because the mask failed physically, but because it was never capable of doing what he needed it to do. Some identities can't be hidden from someone who already knows them. You can cover a face, but you can't conceal a voice, a breath pattern, the unconscious rhythm of a body that has been seen and recognized over years. For Nancy Guthrie, recognition wouldn't have been a process, it would have been immediate, instinctive, certain. And that's where the plan collapses in the most brutal way. Every element, the mask, the gloves, the clothing, the timing, was built to control information, to limit what she could know, what she could later reveal. The mask was the keystone. Remove its effectiveness, and the entire structure loses meaning. But it didn't fail because it slipped, or broke, or exposed a face. It failed because of a deeper miscalculation. He prepared for the obvious, facial recognition, the kind a mask is designed to defeat. What he didn't prepare for was the kind of knowledge that doesn't rely on sight at all. He didn't account for the deeper kind of recognition, the kind built over years. Not a face, but a presence. The way a body moves, the rhythm of breathing, the subtle patterns that become familiar without ever being consciously memorized. For Nancy Guthrie, that kind of knowing wouldn't require sight, only proximity. And that's the question he never asked. Did she know him too? Because the evidence suggests he knew her routine, her vulnerabilities, the exact moment she would be alone. But in that critical second, when she recognized something beyond the mask, the entire future of his plan collapsed. The exit strategy, the exchange, the assumption of silence, all of it disappeared instantly. Imagine that shift from his perspective. He arrived prepared, methodical, confident. He had studied enough to cover every inch of skin, chosen the perfect timing, built a mental script where everything unfolded smoothly. In his mind, it was already done. And then, something breaks through. A look, a voice, a movement. Something unmistakable. The mask becomes irrelevant. And he realizes, she knows. That moment isn't escalation. It's collapse. That moment isn't escalation. It's erasure. Every pathway that existed seconds before, the controlled abduction, the holding, the negotiation, the exchange, the clean release, all of it disappears instantly. The plan doesn't evolve. It ceases to exist. What's left is not strategy, but exposure. A man standing in a situation he never prepared for, holding a target he can no longer safely release, with no script for what comes next. Behavioral criminology has seen this pattern before. When a structured plan collapses, people don't calmly adapt. They don't rationally pivot. The framework that guided every decision is gone, and in its place comes something far more unstable: panic. Not fear in the ordinary sense, but a breakdown of decision-making itself. The organized logic of the plan is replaced by fragmented, reactive thinking. And in that space, actions that were never supposed to happen, actions the plan was specifically designed to avoid, suddenly become the only options that feel available. Violence, in that moment, isn't part of the design. It's what fills the void when the design is gone. This is what Johnny Grewing meant when he said the suspect got in over his head. He built a plan that only worked under perfect conditions, and the moment those conditions vanished, so did his control. There was no backup strategy, no depth, no ability to adapt. What followed wasn't execution, it was reaction. And that reaction, driven by panic, is what left blood on that porch. That's the key distinction. The violence wasn't the plan. It was the aftermath of the plan collapsing. And when you look at the scene through that lens, the blood tells a very different story. According to Maureen O'Connell, the patterns don't match a struggle in motion. There are no voids, no gaps where a body blocked the flow, no signs of dragging, no directional smears. What the evidence suggests instead is far more controlled, and far more unsettling. Nancy Guthrie was not moving, not resisting in a way that left those traces. She was contained, wrapped, and carried away. Which means even after the chaos, even after the collapse, some part of the plan, or something close to it, was still being executed. Not dragged, carried. And that distinction changes everything. Carrying isn't disposal. It's control. It's what someone does when the person in their hands still matters. Even in chaos, even after the plan has fractured, that action suggests something critical. He hadn't abandoned the original premise. Nancy Guthrie was still the asset, not the problem. Her condition still mattered. The forensic details reinforce that picture. A pathologist reviewing the scene described the blood drops as having pale centers, donut-shaped, consistent with blood expelled from the nose or mouth, not from an external wound. In other words, blood produced while breathing, while alive. That aligns directly with what Andrew Bringwell stated, injured, but not killed. And when you combine that with the absence of drag marks and the evidence of controlled movement, the pattern becomes clearer. What happened on that porch was violent, undeniably. But it wasn't execution. It was disruption. A plan unraveling in real time, producing consequences its architect never intended, while still trying, even in the wreckage, to preserve the one thing the plan depended on, keeping her alive. The blood doesn't tell us how Nancy Guthrie's story ends. It tells us the exact moment the plan stopped being a plan. And that distinction matters far beyond the porch itself. Because in investigative terms, there's a critical difference between someone executing a plan and someone reacting after it collapses. A prepared offender is methodical. They rehearse. They anticipate digital footprints, physical evidence, human interactions. They minimize risk in advance. Their actions are controlled, deliberate, and often harder to unravel. But a person in panic operates differently. They're no longer thinking long-term, they're solving immediate problems. And that shift changes everything. Decisions become reactive, urgent, unfiltered. They reach out when they shouldn't. They move in ways they never planned to. They leave behind traces not because they're careless, but because they're overwhelmed. And those mistakes aren't random. They follow patterns. The patterns of someone no longer in control, trying to recover from a situation that has already slipped beyond them. These aren't random mistakes. They're the predictable errors of a specific mental state. And that's exactly what trained investigators are looking for. As Johnny Gruing has emphasized, this case isn't being approached as the work of a seasoned professional. It's being read as the actions of someone who lost control, someone who got in over his head. That profile matters. Because it means the suspect hasn't been living in calm detachment since February 1st, he's been living under pressure. Watching the investigation, following the coverage, making decisions in real time, under stress. And those decisions leave a different kind of trail, not the clean absence of evidence, but a pattern shaped by anxiety, urgency, and fear. There's also a critical factor of time. A well-executed plan buys distance. Evidence fades. Memories weaken. Leads go cold. But panic doesn't buy time. It erodes it. Because someone improvising after a collapse isn't ahead of the investigation. They're reacting to it. Improvisation leaves seams. It creates irregularities, small shifts in behavior that the people closest to you feel before they can explain. The ones who share your daily life start noticing a change in tone, a new tension, an unusual fixation on the news. And for someone in this position, that pressure compounds every day. Because now he isn't just hiding a crime, he's performing normalcy while managing a growing internal crisis. That's not sustainable. People under that kind of cognitive and emotional load don't stay controlled. They slip. They talk when they shouldn't. They act in ways that make someone who knows them pause and look twice. The same lack of professional precision that defined what happened to Nancy Guthrie on that porch is what makes the aftermath harder to maintain. This isn't someone built to carry that weight indefinitely. And investigators understand that. The strategy isn't just about evidence, it's about pressure. As noted by analysts like Johnny Gruing, every public move, every message, even communications involving Savannah Guthrie, reflects a deliberate effort to tighten that pressure. Because in cases like this, the break doesn't always come from the scene. Sometimes, it comes from the person who can no longer hold it together. The recognition theory doesn't just explain what happened, it reshapes where investigators should look. If Nancy Guthrie recognized the person who took her, then he isn't a stranger. And that changes everything. Strangers are tracked through databases, forensic hits, anonymous leads. But someone known well enough to be identified through a mask, in the dark, under stress, exists within a much smaller world. Her neighborhood, her routines, her social orbit, a finite circle of people, a limited set of relationships. And that's where the investigation narrows. Not outward, but inward, through a defined geography of familiarity that investigators have been methodically working through for weeks, alongside DNA evidence, ransom communications, and thousands of tips under the oversight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At its core, after all the analysis, the timelines, the evidence, the entire case reduces to two lines. The plan was never to hurt her, and then she recognized him. The first explains why she was taken alive, why the violence on that porch reads as disruption, not intent. Why experienced voices like Andrew Bringwell saw a controlled abduction that failed. And the second line explains everything that came after. That second sentence explains the evidence in a way nothing else can. It's why the blood left by Nancy Guthrie carries the signature of someone still breathing. Why she was carried, not dragged. Wrapped, not abandoned. Taken, but not killed on that porch. Because the first sentence was the plan. The second sentence was its destruction. It's the variable the plan could not survive. The one thing no mask, no timing, no forensic preparation could fully control: recognition. The moment she looked at him, through that mask, and knew. And that's where the tragedy sharpens. He believed he knew enough, her routines, her vulnerabilities, the exact moment to act. That knowledge gave him access. But he failed to account for what she knew in return. In an instant, everything inverted. The target became a witness. Control became chaos. Every path forward closed, except the ones he never intended to take. What Nancy Guthrie has endured since that night remains the unanswered question at the center of everything. At 84, dependent on daily medication, living with a heart condition, she was taken alive into a situation already unraveling. What followed exists in a space investigators are still trying to reach, while her family waits with a kind of quiet endurance that rarely makes headlines. When Savannah Guthrie said, "It's never too late to do the right thing," those words weren't generic. They were targeted, deliberate. As analysts like Johnny Gruing have suggested, this message is aimed at a very specific kind of suspect, not hardened, not experienced, not built to carry this indefinitely. Someone already under pressure, already feeling the weight of what went wrong. Because at this stage, the investigation isn't just about evidence. It's about psychology. About narrowing the path until only one remains. The one that ends without making this tragedy irreversible. At this point, the path forward is simple, but not easy. Step forward, tell the truth, and stop this from going any further. Someone, somewhere in the world of Nancy Guthrie, knows something. A shift in behavior after February 1st. A comment that felt off. A moment that didn't make sense then, but might now. These cases aren't solved by one dramatic breakthrough. They're built from small pieces. And sometimes, the smallest piece is the one that changes everything. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is actively reviewing every tip, every call, every detail. This case is moving, not fading. Because the truth remains stark, the plan was never to hurt her, but she was hurt anyway. And somewhere in that gap, in the blood, the behavior, the forensic traces of a plan collapsing, is the thread that leads back to the person responsible. Investigators have been following that thread since the first moment it appeared. They haven't stopped. If something you've heard connects to something you've seen, something someone said or did, don't ignore it. It might matter more than you think. The story isn't over. And when it ends, it won't be by accident.